Why do so many people know exactly what they should do for their health, yet still struggle to do it consistently? People know they should sleep earlier, exercise regularly, eat less sugar, stop scrolling late at night, drink more water, focus longer, reduce stress, and yet, despite having more information than ever before, behavior change remains incredibly difficult for most people. So the real question is not, do you know what to do? The real question is, why does the brain resist change, even when change would clearly improve your life? Here's what's really going on inside your body. Habits are not simply psychological, they are deeply biological. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy and automate behavior. Every repeated action strengthens specific neural pathways until the behavior becomes increasingly automatic. This is why habits eventually feel effortless. And it's also why bad habits become difficult to break. Because once a behavior becomes neurologically efficient, the brain prefers repeating it, even if the behavior is unhealthy. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine walking through a field of tall grass. The first time you walk through it, resistance is high, but every repeated walk flattens the path further. Eventually, the trail becomes automatic and easy to follow. Habits work exactly the same way inside the nervous system. Repeated behaviors strengthen neural circuits through a process called neuroplasticity. The brain learns, this behavior happens often, so let's make it more efficient. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about habits is the belief that success depends mainly on motivation. But motivation is highly unreliable biologically. Dopamine fluctuates, energy fluctuates, stress fluctuates, sleep fluctuates, hormones fluctuate, and when people depend only on motivation, consistency collapses the moment physiology changes. This is why sustainable habits are built through systems, environment design, repetition, and nervous system conditioning, not willpower alone. What the research shows is that behavior change becomes far more effective when behaviors are simplified, emotionally rewarding, visually reinforced, and tied to predictable cues. The brain loves efficiency and predictability. And importantly, habits are deeply connected to the dopamine system. Dopamine is not just about pleasure. It's involved in anticipation, motivation, reward prediction, and behavior reinforcement. Every habit loop contains some form of dopamine-driven expectation. Cue, behavior, reward, repeat. Over time, the brain begins craving the behavior before the reward even occurs. This is why people unconsciously reach for their phone, sugar, caffeine, social media, or other compulsive behaviors automatically. The nervous system has learned the loop. Now, the encouraging news is this. The same neuroplasticity that creates bad habits can also create better ones. The brain is always adapting. Every repeated behavior rewires neural circuitry. Every repeated choice strengthens certain pathways while weakening others, which means behavior change is possible at any age. But successful habit change requires understanding the biology behind consistency. Today, we're going to break down exactly how habits form inside the brain. We'll discuss dopamine, stress, sleep, environment design, emotional reinforcement, and nervous system regulation. We'll explore why people relapse into unhealthy behaviors. We'll cover how metabolic health affects discipline and impulse control. And most importantly, we'll go through practical science-based tools for building habits that actually last. Because once you understand the neuroscience of behavior, you stop blaming yourself for inconsistency, and you start building systems that work with your biology instead of against it. One of the most important things to understand about habits is that your brain is always trying to save energy. And the faster a behavior becomes automatic, the less energy the brain has to spend making decisions. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Every repeated behavior strengthens a specific neural circuit. Over time, the brain shifts that behavior away from conscious effort and into automatic execution. This process primarily involves a group of brain structures called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia help automate repeated behaviors so the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of the brain, doesn't need to work as hard constantly. This is incredibly efficient biologically. It's why you can drive familiar routes, brush your teeth, or tie your shoes without much conscious thought. But this same efficiency also explains why unhealthy behaviors become deeply ingrained. The brain does not strongly distinguish between good and bad habits. It mainly learns what behaviors are repeated and rewarded. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your brain like a hiking trail through a forest. Every time you repeat a behavior, you walk the same trail again. Over time, that trail becomes wider, smoother, and easier to follow. Meanwhile, unused trails slowly become overgrown. That's neuroplasticity. The nervous system strengthens what it repeatedly uses. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Small repeated behaviors reshape the brain more effectively than occasional massive effort. Now, this becomes extremely important when we look at dopamine. Dopamine is not just a reward chemical. It's a motivation and anticipation signal. The brain releases dopamine not only when receiving rewards, but when expecting them. This creates what neuroscientists call the cue-reward loop. Cue, behavior, reward, repeat. Eventually, the cue alone begins triggering cravings and automatic behavior. For example, a notification sound triggers phone checking. Stress triggers sugar cravings. Boredom triggers scrolling. Fatigue triggers caffeine. Late-night loneliness triggers emotional eating. The brain learns predictive associations, and over time, behaviors become increasingly automatic. Now, one major reason modern habits become so difficult to control is because many modern technologies hyperstimulate dopamine systems. Social media, ultra-processed food, short-form content, constant novelty, digital stimulation. These create rapid dopamine spikes repeatedly throughout the day, and the nervous system adapts to this high-stimulation environment. Over time, slower but healthier behaviors begin feeling less rewarding by comparison. Reading feels harder. Deep work feels harder. Exercise feels harder initially. Stillness feels uncomfortable because the brain becomes conditioned for instant reward cycles. Now, what the research shows is that excessive dopamine stimulation reduces sensitivity over time, meaning the brain often needs increasing stimulation to achieve the same reward feeling. This is one reason compulsive behaviors escalate gradually. And importantly, this affects discipline. Because when baseline dopamine regulation becomes disrupted, motivation for slower long-term rewards decreases. Now, here's the encouraging part. Dopamine systems are highly adaptable. And one of the best ways to rebuild healthy motivation is through intermittent effort and delayed reward. In simple terms, teach the brain that effort itself predicts reward. For example, instead of rewarding yourself before work with scrolling or stimulation, learn to associate dopamine with completing difficult tasks. This shifts the nervous system gradually. A practical protocol looks like this. Do cognitively demanding work early in the day before high dopamine distractions. Delay social media consumption. Delay highly processed sugary foods. Delay easy stimulation until after meaningful effort. This retrains reward circuitry over time. Now, another major principle for building habits successfully is reducing friction. The brain naturally moves toward convenience. So if healthy behaviors require enormous effort while unhealthy behaviors remain easily accessible, the nervous system will often default toward the easier option under stress. This is why environment design matters so much. For example, if unhealthy snacks are visible, cravings increase. If the phone stays beside the bed, late-night scrolling increases. If workout clothes are prepared beforehand, exercise compliance improves. If healthy meals are prepped in advance, nutritional consistency improves dramatically. The environment constantly shapes behavior automatically. In many cases, changing the environment is more effective than trying to increase willpower. Now, another extremely important factor is stress physiology. When cortisol rises chronically, the brain shifts towards short-term survival behavior. Impulse control weakens. Emotional eating increases. Cravings increase. Patience decreases. This is one reason people often relapse into bad habits during periods of stress, poor sleep, emotional overwhelm, or burnout. Their nervous systems are operating from energy conservation and stress management rather than long-term optimization. And this is why sleep becomes critical for habit formation. Sleep deprivation weakens prefrontal cortex function, the exact region responsible for planning, discipline, emotional regulation, and decision-making. A tired brain becomes far more impulsive biologically. This is one reason people often crave sugar, stimulation, and dopamine-heavy behaviors after poor sleep. Their nervous systems are trying to rapidly restore energy and alertness. A practical protocol here is prioritizing sleep consistency before trying to overhaul every habit simultaneously. Because a regulated nervous system changes behavior far more effectively than an exhausted one. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day focused on neuroscience, metabolic health, habit formation, emotional resilience, and science-based tools for optimizing the brain and body naturally. Because behavior change becomes much easier once you stop fighting your biology and start working with it instead. One of the most powerful shifts people can make when building habits is understanding that behavior change is not primarily about discipline. It's about identity. Because the brain works very differently when a behavior feels connected to who you are instead of something you are forcing temporarily. Here's what's really going on inside your body. The nervous system constantly tries to maintain behavioral consistency with self-image. In neuroscience and psychology, this is sometimes called self-congruence. The brain prefers actions that match identity because inconsistency creates cognitive and emotional tension. This is why lasting habits often fail when people focus only on outcomes instead of identity transformation. For example, someone says, I want to lose weight, I want to meditate. I want to stop procrastinating, but internally, their identity may still be, I'm inconsistent, I always quit. I'm lazy, I'm bad at routines. And the nervous system repeatedly returns toward the familiar identity pattern. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine a thermostat inside a house. You can temporarily heat the house above its normal setting, but eventually the system pulls the temperature back toward its programmed baseline. Identity works similarly. Temporary motivation can push behavior briefly, But long-term consistency usually returns to the identity the brain believes most strongly. This is why sustainable change often begins with changing internal language. Instead of, I'm trying to work out, shift toward, I'm someone who trains consistently. Instead of, I'm trying to eat healthier. Shift toward, I'm someone who takes care of my brain and body. That subtle shift matters neurologically because identity influences behavior prediction, and repeated behavior reinforces identity further. Now, another critical principle here is emotional reward. The brain repeats behaviors that feel rewarding emotionally. And importantly, rewards do not always need to be external. Internal rewards matter enormously. Progress tracking, completion satisfaction, confidence, momentum, self-respect. These activate dopamine systems too. This is one reason tiny wins become so powerful biologically. Every completed habit gives the brain evidence. This behavior is part of who I am. And that reinforcement compounds over time. What the research shows is that immediate positive reinforcement improves habit adherence significantly. This is why people struggle with habits whose rewards are delayed far into the future. For example, exercise improves long-term health. Healthy eating improves longevity. Sleep improves cognition. But the rewards are gradual. Meanwhile, unhealthy habits often provide immediate dopamine rewards. Sugar, scrolling, alcohol, impulse spending, entertainment. The nervous system naturally prioritizes immediate reinforcement. So one highly effective strategy is attaching immediate positive reinforcement to healthy behaviors. For example, tracking workouts visually, checking off habits daily, celebrating consistency, using social accountability, listening to enjoyable music during exercise, making healthy behaviors emotionally satisfying in the short term. Now, another major factor in behavior change is emotional state. Many bad habits are not actually pleasure-seeking behaviors. They are nervous system regulation behaviors. People overeat to calm stress, scroll to escape discomfort, procrastinate to avoid anxiety, drink alcohol to reduce emotional tension. Compulsive habits often function as temporary nervous system relief mechanisms. This is extremely important to understand, because if someone removes the behavior without addressing the underlying stress physiology, the brain simply searches for another coping mechanism. This is why root cause thinking matters. The question is not only, how do I stop the habit? The deeper question is, what problem is this habit solving for the nervous system? Now, one of the most powerful tools for breaking bad habits is increasing awareness before the behavior occurs. Most habits happen automatically. Cue, reaction, behavior, minimal conscious interruption. So the goal is inserting awareness between the trigger and the action. A very effective protocol is urge surfing. When a craving appears, instead of reacting immediately, pause and observe it. Notice, where do you feel it physically? Chest, jaw, stomach, hands? Notice the emotional state beneath it. Stress, fatigue, loneliness, boredom. Then breathe slowly and delay the behavior for even 5 to 10 minutes. This weakens automaticity gradually, because cravings rise and fall like waves. And over time, the nervous system learns, I can tolerate discomfort without reacting automatically. That is a profound neurological shift. Now, another extremely important principle is habit stacking. The brain learns new behaviors more easily when attached to existing routines. For example, meditate after brushing your teeth, walk after lunch, journal before bed, take supplements with breakfast, stretch after showering. Existing neural patterns become anchors for new behaviors. This reduces cognitive resistance significantly. Now let's talk about perfectionism. Perfectionism destroys consistency for many people because the brain interprets one mistake as total failure. But neuroscience shows behavior change works through repetition, not perfection. Missing once rarely matters. Repeating the relapse pattern does. In simple terms, consistency beats intensity. Always. A missed workout matters far less than quitting entirely. One unhealthy meal matters far less than abandoning nutritional structure completely. The brain changes through repeated averages over time, not isolated moments. And one final point here is critical. Self-compassion actually improves behavior change more effectively than chronic self-criticism. Many people believe harsh internal pressure creates discipline, but excessive shame increases cortisol and emotional exhaustion. This often drives more impulsive behavior and not less. A calmer nervous system changes more effectively than a chronically threatened one. So sustainable discipline is not about punishment. It's about building trust with yourself through repeated action. And biologically, every repeated action reshapes the brain little by little. One of the biggest reasons people fail to build lasting habits is because they rely too heavily on intensity instead of consistency. They try to transform their entire life overnight. Extreme diet, extreme workout plan, extreme productivity schedule, extreme restriction. And for a short period, dopamine and motivation push them forward. But eventually, biology pushes back. Here's what's really going on inside your body. The nervous system does not like sudden massive change. Large behavioral shifts increase stress load, cognitive demand, and emotional resistance simultaneously. And when stress rises too high, the brain naturally seeks relief and familiarity. This is why extreme approaches often create relapse cycles. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine trying to sprint a marathon. At first, speed feels exciting, but eventually exhaustion catches up. Sustainable progress requires pacing the nervous system. Habits work exactly the same way. The brain changes most effectively through repeated manageable actions that become neurologically stable over time. This is why small behaviors often outperform massive goals. A 10-minute daily walk repeated for a year changes physiology more than a perfect workout plan followed inconsistently for 2 weeks. Small repeated wins reduce resistance while strengthening identity. And importantly, small behaviors lower threat perception inside the nervous system. The brain thinks, this is manageable. That matters enormously. Now, one of the most powerful principles in neuroscience-based habit formation is reducing activation energy. Activation energy is the amount of friction required to begin a behavior. The harder a habit feels to start, the less likely the brain is to initiate it consistently. This is why simplifying the starting point becomes incredibly effective. For example, instead of committing to a 1-hour workout, commit to putting on workout clothes and exercising for 5 minutes. Instead of trying to meditate for 30 minutes, start with 1 minute daily. Instead of attempting a perfect diet overhaul, begin by improving breakfast consistently. The objective is not maximizing difficulty. The objective is maximizing repeatability. Because repeated action strengthens neural pathways. Now, another major factor here is timing. Your biology changes dramatically throughout the day. Cortisol naturally rises in the morning to increase alertness. Dopamine fluctuates. Energy fluctuates. Willpower fluctuates. This means habit timing matters tremendously. What the research shows is that behaviors performed at consistent times become automated faster because the brain associates them with predictable circadian cues. In simple terms, consistency of timing strengthens consistency of behavior. This is why morning routines can become extremely powerful. The brain begins expecting the sequence automatically. Wake up, sunlight, hydration, movement, focused work. The nervous system loves predictable patterns. And one of the most important biological anchors for behavior consistency is sleep timing. Poor sleep weakens prefrontal cortex function, increases impulsivity, reduces emotional regulation, and increases dopamine-seeking behavior. A sleep-deprived brain naturally moves toward convenience and immediate reward. This is one reason people often abandon healthy habits after poor sleep. The nervous system is prioritizing short-term survival and energy restoration. So one of the best habit-building tools is actually improving sleep quality first. Because a rested brain has better impulse control, better planning ability, and greater emotional stability. Now let's talk about stress eating and emotional habits. Many unhealthy habits are linked to cortisol and nervous system overload. Under stress, the brain often seeks fast dopamine and fast energy. Sugar, processed foods, scrolling, alcohol, compulsive stimulation. These behaviors temporarily reduce discomfort. But over time, they dysregulate dopamine systems and reinforce the stress-reward loop. This is why metabolic health matters deeply for behavior change. Blood sugar instability increases cravings dramatically. Rapid glucose spikes followed by crashes increase irritability, fatigue, and impulsive decision-making. A more stable metabolic approach includes higher protein intake, more fiber, mineral-rich whole foods, hydration, healthy fats, and reducing ultra-processed high-sugar foods. Stable blood sugar creates more stable energy and better emotional regulation. And better emotional regulation improves habit consistency significantly. Now, another extremely important factor is social environment. Behavior is highly contagious neurologically. Humans unconsciously mirror habits, emotional patterns, language, expectations, and lifestyles from surrounding groups. This involves systems related to social learning and mirrored neurons. If someone spends time around people prioritizing health, discipline, learning, and emotional regulation, those behaviors begin feeling more normal biologically. Environment shapes expectation. This is why community matters so much for lasting behavior change. And importantly, digital environments count too. Your nervous system adapts to what it consumes repeatedly. Constant outrage, negativity, comparison, and overstimulation increase stress physiology. Meanwhile, environments focused on growth, learning, movement, and health reinforce better patterns. Now, one final principle here is incredibly powerful. Never rely on feeling ready. Because action often creates motivation, not the other way around. Many people wait until they feel motivated. But motivation frequently appears after movement begins, after the walk starts, after the workout starts, after the work session starts. Behavior changes brain chemistry. And once dopamine begins rising from productive action, momentum builds naturally. This is why starting small matters so much. Small action creates neural momentum, and neural momentum eventually becomes identity. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day focused on neuroscience, metabolism, emotional resilience, habit formation, and science-backed tools for optimizing the brain and body naturally. Because lasting change is rarely built through extreme effort. It's built through repeated biological alignment over time. One of the most powerful and scientifically supported ways to strengthen habits and break bad ones is learning how to recover quickly after failure. Because setbacks are not what destroy progress. The real danger is the neurological effect of all or nothing thinking. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When people make a mistake, the brain often shifts into a stress response. Cortisol rises, self-criticism increases, motivation drops, and many people unconsciously enter what psychologists call the abstinence violation effect. This is the mindset of, I already messed up, so it doesn't matter anymore. One missed workout becomes 2 weeks without movement. One unhealthy meal becomes an entire weekend of overeating. One skipped habit becomes total abandonment. But biologically isolated mistakes matter very little. What shapes the brain long-term is repeated behavioral direction over time. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine steering a ship across the ocean. A small temporary drift off course does not ruin the journey. What matters is whether the ship corrects direction quickly. Habits work exactly the same way. Fast recovery matters more than perfect consistency. And what the research shows is that people who recover quickly from setbacks build stronger long-term adherence than people chasing perfection obsessively. Because perfection creates fragile motivation, while flexibility creates sustainable resilience. Now, this becomes extremely important when we talk about dopamine. Many people unknowingly create unhealthy dopamine relationships with habit formation. They attach self-worth entirely to performance. So when they succeed, dopamine rises. When they fail, emotional collapse follows. This creates unstable motivation cycles. A healthier approach is rewarding consistency and effort rather than perfection. For example, instead of focusing only on weight loss, focus on becoming someone who consistently nourishes the body well. Instead of obsessing over perfect productivity, focus on building reliable focus routines. The brain responds much better to process-based reinforcement than constant outcome obsession. Now, another extremely important concept is behavioral flexibility. Rigid systems often break under real-life stress. Travel, poor sleep, emotional overwhelm, family demands, work pressure, unexpected disruptions. If a habit system only works under perfect conditions, it's neurologically fragile. The nervous system needs adaptability. A powerful strategy is creating minimum viable habits. For example, if you cannot do a full workout, do 5 minutes. If you cannot prepare a perfect meal, choose the best available option. If you cannot meditate for 20 minutes, breathe slowly for 2 minutes. This keeps neural momentum alive. Because maintaining identity continuity matters enormously. The brain learns, I still show up. And repeated identity reinforcement protects long-term consistency. Now, another major factor in breaking bad habits is replacing, not simply removing, behaviors. The nervous system dislikes empty behavioral gaps. If someone removes scrolling, overeating, alcohol, or constant stimulation without replacing the emotional reward or regulation mechanism, the brain often searches for another compulsive outlet. This is why replacement behaviors work so effectively. Walking instead of stress eating, breathing instead of impulsive reacting, exercise instead of emotional suppression, reading instead of late-night scrolling, tea instead of alcohol rituals. The nervous system still receives regulation, but through healthier pathways. Now let's talk about emotional regulation, because many habits are actually emotional state management strategies. And one of the biggest hidden drivers of unhealthy behavior today is chronic nervous system dysregulation. Constant stimulation, poor sleep, inflammation, social comparison, financial stress, isolation, information overload, all of these increase baseline cortisol and emotional fatigue. An overwhelmed brain seeks immediate relief. This is why habit formation works better when recovery is prioritized simultaneously. Recovery is not laziness biologically. Recovery restores prefrontal cortex function, and the prefrontal cortex is essential for impulse control, planning, and long-term thinking. A practical recovery protocol includes consistent sleep timing, morning sunlight exposure, daily movement, breath work, adequate protein intake, hydration, quiet time without stimulation, and periods of real mental recovery. Even 10 to 15 minutes of deliberate nervous system downregulation daily can improve emotional resilience significantly. Now, another powerful principle is visual tracking. The brain responds strongly to visible progress markers, calendars, habit trackers, checklists, journals, progress photos. These create reinforcement loops that strengthen motivation and behavioral continuity. You're giving the nervous system visual evidence of consistency. And importantly, the brain hates breaking visible streaks. This increases compliance naturally. Now, one final point here is critical. Your habits shape far more than behavior. They shape biology. Repeated sleep habits affect hormones. Repeated food choices affect insulin sensitivity. Repeated stress patterns affect cortisol. Repeated movement affects mitochondria, inflammation, and brain function. Repeated focus patterns affect dopamine and attention span. Over time, habits become physiology, and physiology becomes identity. This is why small repeated behaviors compound so dramatically over years. A daily walk may seem insignificant until it improves insulin sensitivity, sleep quality, stress regulation, mood, cognition, and longevity simultaneously. One consistent, healthy behavior often creates positive downstream effects across the entire nervous system. And this is the deeper truth about habits. You are not simply building routines. You are shaping the brain and body continuously through repetition. So when we step back and look at the bigger picture, one thing becomes very clear. Habits are not simply behaviors. They are biological patterns wired into the nervous system through repetition. Every repeated action strengthens neural pathways. Every repeated thought reinforces emotional conditioning. Every repeated choice teaches the brain what to automate. And over time, those automatic behaviors shape your health, energy, metabolism, focus, emotional resilience, and even longevity. That's the real power of habits. They become physiology. Today, we talked about how dopamine drives anticipation and reinforcement, how the brain builds automatic behavioral loops through repetition, how stress, cortisol, poor sleep, and blood sugar instability weaken impulse control and increase compulsive behavior. We explored how environment shapes behavior more powerfully than motivation alone. We discussed how identity-based habits create deeper and more sustainable change. And we broke down practical science-based tools for building healthier patterns naturally. Because once you understand the neuroscience of habits, you realize something incredibly important. Most behavior is not random. It's conditioned. And conditioned behaviors can be retrained. That's neuroplasticity. Now, this doesn't mean behavior change becomes easy overnight. The brain naturally resists uncertainty and prefers familiar pathways. Even unhealthy routines can feel biologically safe simply because they are familiar. But repetition changes familiarity. Small, consistent actions gradually become automatic. And eventually, the new behavior starts requiring less effort. This is why consistency always beats intensity. Extreme changes often overwhelm the nervous system, but manageable repeated actions create sustainable adaptation. A short daily walk repeated consistently can reshape metabolism, mood, sleep quality, insulin sensitivity, and emotional regulation over time. A consistent sleep routine can improve cortisol balance, focus, appetite control, and decision-making. A few minutes of deliberate breathing daily can improve nervous system regulation and reduce impulsive stress reactions. Small behaviors compound biologically. And one of the most important ideas from this entire discussion is this. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Goals create direction, but systems create automatic behavior. This is why environment design matters. Identity matters. Sleep matters. Stress regulation matters. Metabolic health matters. The healthier and more regulated the nervous system becomes, the easier consistent behavior feels. Now, another critical point. Breaking bad habits is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. Most unhealthy behaviors happen automatically. The objective is creating space between the trigger and the reaction. That pause changes everything neurologically, because awareness interrupts automaticity. And once awareness appears, choice becomes possible again. So here's my challenge for you. Don't try to overhaul your entire life tonight. Instead, choose one small behavior that aligns with the person you want to become. Maybe it's walking every morning. Maybe it's sleeping earlier. Maybe it's replacing late-night scrolling with reading. Maybe it's eating a high-protein breakfast. Maybe it's breathing for 2 minutes before stressful conversations. Keep it simple. Keep it repeatable. And focus on consistency more than perfection. Then watch what happens over the next few weeks. Notice your energy, your focus, your discipline, your emotional stability. Because eventually, habits stop feeling forced. They become identity, and identity shapes biology. If this video added value, like the video and subscribe to join others optimizing their brain, metabolism, nervous system, and long-term health naturally through science-backed tools and practical neuroscience. And as always, thank you for watching.